If there is just one skill to get soft, juicy poached chicken every time, it's the control of the water temperature and the cooking time accurately. My goal is to cook the chicken to be juicy, just like how it's served at chicken rice stalls in Singapore, even at the breast. And through a series of experiments, we'll find out what's the ideal core meat temperature to cook the chicken to, how long it should spend in the hot water bath, and how hot should the water temperature be. By measuring and controlling these three variables, if we can find the sweet spot for the right doneness, we can get soft, juicy chicken every time. And as a bonus, we'll explore the ideal ice water bath setup to get this jelly under the skin. Before we take a closer look at why core temperature matters, we need to first understand its relation to food safety. If not, there's a risk of consuming unsafe meat. In fact, some chicken rice stalls out there had reported cases of salmonella, probably because they might have cooked their chicken way underdone. Also, I believe hawkers don't use thermometers and just wing it by cooking with experience, poking the chicken to ensure the juices run clear or use some other telltale signs. But I guess this doesn't always mean it's done, especially at the core. A YouTuber, NG, also went around 100 chicken rice stalls before and did lab tests on the meat and found some stalls had salmonella in the chicken. Thankfully, the authorities have stepped up supervising measures and now declare most chicken rice stalls safe to eat. Good for tourists and locals like you and me. So the official guideline is to cook the chicken to at least 75 degrees Celsius according to Singapore authorities. The USDA said 74 degrees Celsius, but it is actually possible to achieve the same level of food safety by cooking the chicken at a lower temperature for longer. If we dig deeper into the USDA research, we'll find this table which tells us how long we could cook our chicken to at whichever temperature. I first came across this when I was reading Kenji Lopez in the US about his sous vide chicken breast, and he said that cooking at a lower temperature for longer is the key to get juicy and not dry chicken breast. So this should be it, right? But there's one more catch I noticed. This table also has different fat percentages and the timing is longer for fattier parts of the meat. So with a whole chicken that has lean meat at the breast and fattier parts at the skin and the thigh, which timings should we use? So I found that it's actually safe to use the 12% timings for the whole chicken, even if we don't know what is the fat percentage. So why then do authorities recommend 74 degrees Celsius? Well, I think it's because it simplifies things a lot and ensures public safety for cooked meat served immediately. To test how core meat temperature varies with juiciness and the taste of the meat, I got here 7 chickens to cook to a range of temperatures. Basically, I'm repeating Kenji's experiment here, but I'm using a whole chicken instead of using just a piece of chicken breast. The idea is to place the chicken in boiling water, then reduce it to a simmer immediately and keep checking the chicken thigh area until the target temperature is reached. Then, I transfer to a warm pot of water heated to the same target temperature and let the chicken sit there until time's up. I repeated this setup for the rest of the chicken and compared the results after all the chickens have cooled to room temperature. I found that the chicken breast we like is more towards the higher temperatures at about 68 to 71 degrees Celsius range. There was also a trade-off here as higher cooking temperatures lead to sweeter meat but also tougher and drier in texture, while lower temperatures lead to a more moist, juicy meat but less meaty in flavor. For the thigh meat, however, they are all about the same juiciness, except that the higher temperature ones are a little more rubbery. This shows how the final core meat temperature matters, as even a few degrees temperature difference can affect the taste and texture of the chicken, especially at the breast. But as I was reflecting on the results, I think I made a mistake, because I only measured the thigh temperature as I assumed that if the thigh is done, the breast should be done too, because the higher fat percentage cooking times is always longer than that of the lower fat percentage according to this table. But when I tested cooking a chicken again and measured the temperature at the thigh, it registers 63 degrees Celsius, but at the breast, it's only about 40 degrees. This must be because the breast is thicker, so it doesn't cook as fast as the thigh. Second problem also is my ad hoc meat thermometer might not be measuring the core or the coldest part of the meat, so I might have eaten undercooked chicken breast just now. Luckily, I only had a few tummy problems, so to improve my last experiment setup, I ordered a set of these fancy wireless thermometer probes by Combustion Inc. to constantly monitor the core meat temp and also get this nice graph over time. It does this by measuring the temperature every 5 seconds, and it has multiple sensors along the probe, so it will tell me what is the core temperature of the meat, even if it goes through a little. I got 2 probes, one for the breast and one for the thigh. And initially, the probe temperature dipped to a low 14 degrees as I inserted it into the chicken that just came out from the fridge. And after it goes into the boiling water, the ambient temperature jumps and then relaxes to a simmer, but the core meat temperature only rises very slowly. And as suspected earlier, the chicken breast cooks much slower than the thigh, so I waited until the breast reaches my target temperature before transferring to my water bath. But things got a little tricky because of carry-over cooking. Even though I placed the chicken in a water bath at my target temperature, the core breast temperature still rises relentlessly to about 4 to 5 degrees higher. And I think it's because of how heat transfer works. The warmer water heats the meat surface, which then heats the inner meat. So even after pulling the chicken out of the hot water, the meat surface is still warmer, so the cooking actually continues until it evens out. The final dip at the end is after pasteurization time's up, so I ran the chicken under the water tap to stop the cooking process. So to account for carryover cooking for the rest of the chickens, I moved the chicken into another pot about 5 degrees earlier and then start the countdowns after the target temperature is reached. After tasting all these chickens at these temperatures, we found similar results. We still prefer the higher temps for a meatier flavor at the expense of a little fibrous meat, while the lower temps one are very soft and tender, but they lack the chicken meaty flavor. So cooking at a higher temp actually gives us more flavor, which is more important to us than the texture. And 68 degrees Celsius gives a nice balance between the two. The thigh meats also are very forgiving to temperatures, and taste-wise, they're all about the same, except that the more cooked ones are a little bouncier in texture. There are 3 more observations we can make from these results. One is the actual come-up time depends on the starting temperature of the chicken. The colder it is, the longer it's going to take to cook. And that 10 to 15 minutes variance is significant enough to potentially overcook our chicken. So not only should we measure the ending core temp, we should also take note of the starting core temp to estimate how long it might take so as not to overcook it. Secondly, here is a table of the cooking times, and notice how the most practical chicken happens to also be our favorite core temperature of 68 degrees Celsius, as the cooking time is the shortest and we could just leave it in the pot for a minute before taking it out. The others wouldn't be so practical, like if we want a 62 degrees Celsius chicken, it takes about 30 minutes to reach that core temperature, but we also need another 16 minutes to hold at this temperature. And if we leave it in the pot, the core temperature is going to rise and it will be overdone. So if we must, then we have to control the heating more precisely by using a sous vide machine or a slow start technique, which we'll explore later. Third, to target 68 degrees Celsius, I could actually even pull the chicken out 1 to 2 degrees earlier because carryover cooking still happens at the core breast, even under running water, due to the slow heat response of thicker meat. Look what happens if I pull it out at 68 degrees Celsius. The warmer meat surface continues to heat up the core, rising to 70 degrees Celsius and stays elevated there for about a minute or two. Then it takes about 2 hours to slowly go back down to room temperature. So this means I could actually pull it out 1 to 2 degrees earlier, and it is more than enough to meet the safety guidelines. We'll explore ways to minimize carryover cooking later, but meanwhile, for the extra chickens, I just had to invite a few friends over again for lunch and dinner parties and pack some frozen meals to finish the chickens, so we're good. Now that we've found our favorite target temperature for juicy chicken, could we get better tasting meat if we put the chicken into room temperature water first and slowly heat it up until the chicken cooks? Daniel Gritzer from Serious Eats found that a cold start makes the chicken breast juicier, so I'm trying it out with a whole chicken. The slow start begins with the chicken in room temperature water on a medium heat until the meat reaches our target temperature, whereas the fast start method begins with boiling water first and then putting the chicken in, which is what we've been doing for our previous experiments. And after checking out the meat, we actually prefer the fast start method here because the breast is more tender while the slow start was more chewy and fibrous. The slow start also did take longer, but not by much, just 10 minutes more. This is contrary to what Daniel found, likely because I allowed the slow start method to reach a boil. So I repeated the experiment by only allowing the slow start water to reach up to the target temperature of 68 to 70 degrees Celsius as Daniel did, and we ended up with the core breast and the thigh temperatures converging. And it took a really long time to come up to temperature, especially towards the end. I also had to turn the heat off and on, and this wouldn't be possible without constantly monitoring the temperature or poking the chicken multiple times with a thermometer. The results I got were mixed. The slow start yielded tender breasts, edge to edge like sous vide chicken, even retaining a bit of pink, while the fast start method had a bit more fibers around the edges and had a tender bite. But the slow start thighs lacked flavor compared to the fast start ones because it was cooked at a lower temperature. And overall, the slow start chicken is maybe 10 to 20% better, and both chickens are still really juicy and good. The good deal about the slow start is that there's almost no carryover cooking, and technically it has a long time to pasteurize, so the final temperature we cook to is a matter of preference of how juicy or tasty we want the meat to be. But since this slow start is not very practical, I'll stick to the fast start method for everyday chicken. But if I got the time and I want it extra tender, I would go for the slow start method. As for the amount of water to use, normally we should cover the chicken totally with water and face the breast downwards and letting the cavity fill with water to sink in. This is poaching by definition, but out of curiosity, what happens if we don't cover the chicken with water? The breast on top is basically being lightly steamed instead of being heated in surrounding water, and this results in lower temperatures and kind of like a slow start, as you can see in this graph, and longer cooking times. To my surprise, we could actually get the best of both worlds for the slow start and the fast start method by half submerging the chicken, because the breast had the tenderness of a slow start and still retains a touch of pink, while the thigh meat had the juiciness and the flavor of a fast start chicken because it was cooked underwater at a higher temperature. But at home, this only works for one chicken in a pot, whereas pro chicken rice stores cook all their chickens in one big pot using the fast start method because they're in for a business. However, Chatterbox, a famous restaurant that serves the most expensive chicken rice in Singapore, actually steams their chicken entirely instead of poaching. Anyway, I'm glad I tested this water level because if not, I wouldn't have discovered this method. And all this while, I've been using just water to cook my chicken and not seasoned stock or any aromatics in it, because eventually I'm going to dunk the chicken in ice cold water to chill it, and that will wash away any flavor. And I also prefer to separately use a rich chicken stock simmered from the bones for 24 hours for better rice, as I found in my last videos. So now that I've figured out the ideal temperature, time and technique to cook the chicken, my next goal is to get this jelly under the skin. This is after dunking the chicken after it's done into water with some ice, but I didn't get much jelly at first, so I suspect the water wasn't cold enough. I took a look at the professional chicken rice stalls and they have massive amounts of ice, more so than water, so it's probably 0 degrees Celsius in there. So for home use, I figured I could come close by chilling a big tub of water overnight in the fridge till about 4 degrees Celsius and freeze massive blocks of ice containers to put the chicken in iceberg waters. This almost completely stops any carryover cooking and we get very cold water for longer. So I found it takes about 1 hour for the chicken to chill, which is about the same time as the pro store said, and the appearance between the two setups is massively different too. The chilled ice bath chicken looks much more shiny and glistening compared to just a normal ice water bath. But when I look into the meat, I'm still not getting any significant difference in aspect under the skin, apart from looking shinier and firmer in texture due to the very cold water. In fact, the less cold water gave me a more visible layer of aspic at the thigh. So as I was cooking another chicken again, I noticed that the skin balloons due to an air pocket. Maybe the secret is to get the liquid underneath the skin, according to this Reddit thread, so that the liquid would form a jello when cooled, giving us aspic under the chicken skin. To test this theory, I made my chicken stock by simmering the bones of our chicken for over 24 hours. But don't throw out the bones yet, as you can still boil them again with water to get a decent chicken soup. Then, I added in extra packs of chicken feet, the most cost-efficient part for gelatin from the tendons of the animal which gives it strength and elasticity. And after an overnight simmer, a thin layer of gelatin forms at the top. Taking a sample into the fridge, I confirmed that it turns into jello and it starts melting at about 20 degrees Celsius onwards. So I probably need to use my iceberg water bath to cool the chicken below this temperature. Before cooking another chicken, I loosen the skin and ensure there is space underneath before putting it into this gelatinous stock, and then dunked it underneath an iceberg. But to my disappointment, there is still no aspic at all underneath the skin. So I think this one I had earlier is probably not aspic, but some kind of solidified fat underneath the skin. A related question I'm curious about is the ideal serving temperature of the chicken for optimum flavor and texture. Basically, how long should a chicken sit in this chilled ice bath? I imagine it wouldn't be pleasant to eat ice-cold chicken, right? So I varied the serving temperatures by chilling cuts of chicken breast to various temperatures. And we like 20 degrees Celsius the most as it gives a nice elegant touch of chillness to it. Anything colder makes the meat tougher, cardboard-like, and the flavors are a little more muted. But having a little chillness is a nice touch, and all we need is 60 minutes in an ice bath, preferably using water chilled overnight to get the chicken cold enough. We live in Singapore, which is a warm city all year round, and one of my favorite chicken rice stalls out there serves ice-cold chicken, which is probably 5 to 10 degrees at the core, and it's really nice when you eat it in a hot hawker center, according to the third generation owner.
For the Singapore weather, when it's so hot, the cold chicken really hits the spot.
So actually it's not bad to have it at home too when the weather is hot, and 20 degrees Celsius is just at where we prefer it to be. One more food for thought why we need an ice water bath instead of just putting the whole chicken in the fridge is because the moving air in the fridge would dry out the skin of the chicken, whereas the chicken remains moist when we soak it in water. So in summary, getting the timing and temperature right is key to juicy poached chicken every time. We learned that the ideal target core temperature for juicy flavorful meat is 68 degrees Celsius at the breast and above 70s for the thigh. And this is also safe enough to eat if the chicken is held long enough at this temperature, about a minute or two. The poaching takes about 35 to 50 minutes depending on a lot of things. Regardless, we must have at least a thermometer to poke and check that the core temp hits the target temp at the thickest part of the breast before pulling it out. Remember to account for any carryover cooking as it could take the core temperature up by another 1 to 2 degrees Celsius depending on which method you use. Doing a slow start or a half-water poach will minimize carryover cooking and makes the chicken extra tender as the water never gets too hot, but it also takes longer and some patience, and again a thermometer to counter any other variables. After cooking, a poached chicken is best served at 20 degrees Celsius after chilling it in ice water for about an hour to stop any carryover cooking, and this also gives the meat a nice cooling touch. And if you're lucky, you might see some jelly under the skin, but you will always get beautiful shiny chicken. In my next video, after practicing with so many chickens in this video, I would like to show how I cut up the chicken boneless style using beginner-friendly techniques, and it makes the chicken much more enjoyable to eat without any bones. And this is also the hallmark of chicken rice served in Singapore.